the Vaishnava calendar, it's the festival of Jagannath Mishra. And on this day, Jagannath Mishra, Lord Chaitanya's father, celebrated the birth of his son Nimai by giving varieties of charity to the brahmanas, professional singers, dancers, blessing givers, and the poor. Chandrasekharacharya and Srivas Thakur performed the ritualistic ceremonies prescribed at the time of birth according to religious principles. So this is how they celebrated the day after Lord Chaitanya's actual birth, because Lord Chaitanya appeared at Moonrise, and then the following day was the celebration of the Christmas festival. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita, chapter entitled Chapter 6, The Lame Man and the Blind Man. Ever since the BBT Press Marathon in the summer of 1975, the press had continued to keep up with Srila Prabhupada's writing. A sweet transcendental competition had developed between Prabhupada's press and the book distributors. In November of 1975, Prabhupada had written to one of the leading book distributors. The BBT says that they are publishing at the speed of my translating and that you will distribute at the pace of publishing. That's nice, but still I'm ahead in my translation work. They owe me now the 6th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm working already on the 7th canto. In recent months, however, Srila Prabhupada's literary output had been diminishing, mostly because of his involvement in management. His direct supervision of the construction in Bombay, his month-long managerial drive in Vrindavan, his struggle to heal a major ISKCON schism, such activities were not conducive to writing. In Mayapur, when the devotees failed to control the slamming of doors, he complained bitterly that this heart-cracking sound interrupted his meditative translating. He explained that he sometimes thought for 2 or 3 days about a single purport before actually writing it. Actually, the word translating is incomplete in describing Srila Prabhupada's writing. Translating involved only the verses and the synonyms, but Srila Prabhupada's deepest meditations, what he referred to as his personal ecstasies, were his Bhaktivedanta purports. Composing the purports as well as translating the verses came best when he could think about them throughout the day, not just when he turned on his dictating machine at 1 a.m. He was translating the extremely grave and complex Vedic knowledge into a modern context, thus making it understandable to Western readers, and it was a great demanding task. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 We're doing 12 again because I didn't know it was 14. Vishesha Buddhi Vivaramanacha Pashyama Yanna Vyavaharatonyat Ka Ishvaras Tatra Kim Ishitavyam Tathapi Rajan Karvamat Gimte Vishesha Buddhe Vivaramanacha Pashyama Yanna Vyavaharatonyat Ka Ishvaras Tatra Kam Ishitavyam Tathapi Rajan Karavama Ginte Vishesha Buddhe Vivaramanacha Pashyama Yanna Vyavaharatonyat Ka Ishvaras Tatra Kim Ishitavyam Tathapi Rajan karavama kinte.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte. Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Ka ishvara satrakam ishatavyam.
Ka ishvara statrakam ishitavyam.
Tatapi rajan karavama
Tatapi rajan
kinte.
karavama kinte.
Vishesha Buddha Vivaramanacha.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Ishvarasya Takakim Ishvayacham.
Ka ishvara statrakam ishitavyam.
Tatapi Rajan Karamava Kinte.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte. Ladies.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Ka ishvara satrakam ishitavyam.
Kanishvara tattvakim ishitavyam.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Vishesha buddhe vivaramanacha.
Pashyama yana vyavaharatonya.
Pashyama yanna vyavaharatonya.
Ka ishvara statrakam ishitavyam.
Ka ishvara statrakam ishitavyam.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte.
Tatapi rajan karavama kinte. Vishesha buddhi,
Vishesha buddhe
of the conception of the distinction between servant, master and servant.
of the conception of the distinction between master and servant.
Vivaram,
Vivaram,
the scope.
so,
Manak,
mana,
a little.
little,
Cha,
cha,
also.
also,
Pashyamaha,
pashyama,
I see.
I see.
Yat,
Yet,
which.
which,
Na,
na,
not. Vivaharataha, than the temporary usage or convention. Anyat, other. Kaha, who. Ishvaraha, the master. Tatra, in this. Kim, who. Ishitavyam, is to be controlled. Tapi, nevertheless. Rajan, O king, if you still think that you are master and I am servant. Garabama, I may do. Kim, what? Day, for you. Translation. My dear king, if you still think that you are the king and that I am your servant, you should order me, and I should follow your order. I can then say that this differentiation is temporary, and it expands only from usage or convention. I do not see any other cause. In that case, who is the master and who is the servant? Everyone is being forced by the laws of material nature. Therefore, no one is master and no one is servant. Nevertheless, if you think that you are the master and that I am the servant, I shall accept this. Please order me. What can I do for you? Please repeat. My dear king, if you still think that you are the king and that I am your servant, you should order me, and I should follow your order. I can then say that this differentiation is temporary, and it expands only from usage or convention. I do not see any other cause. In that case, who is the master and who is the servant? Everyone is being forced by the laws of material nature. Therefore, no one is master and no one is servant. Nonetheless, if you think that you are the master and that I am the servant, I shall accept this. Please order me. What can I do for you? Purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. It is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Aham Mameti. One thinks, I am this body, and in this bodily relationship he is my master. He is my servant, she is my wife, and he is my son. All these conceptions are temporary due to the inevitable change of body and the arrangement of material nature. We are gathered together like straws floating in the waves of an ocean, straws that are inevitably separated by the laws of the waves. In this material world, everyone is floating on the waves of the ocean of nescience, as described by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Maya Ravashe Yachaveshi Kacha Habadubabai Jivi Krishna Dasa Evishvasa Karli Tara Dukunai. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur states that all men and women are floating like straws on the waves of material nature. If they come to the understanding that they are the eternal servants of Krishna, they will put an end to this floating condition. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 3.37, Kam Esha Krodha Esha Raja Guna Samudbhava. Due to the mode of passion, we desire many things, and according to our desire or anxiety, and according to the order of the Supreme Lord, material nature gives us a certain type of body. For some time we play as a master or servant, as actors play on the stage under someone else's direction. While we are in the human form, we should put an end to this nonsensical stage of performance. We should come to our original constitutional position, known as Krishna consciousness. At the present moment, the real master is material nature. Devi Shugunamai Mama Maya Durataya. Under the spell of material nature, we are becoming servants and masters. But if we agree to be controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His eternal servants, this temporary condition ceases to exist. Om Gyanativarandasya Gyananjana Shivakaya Chakshuramritanyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So just to recap what's been happening so far is so Jad Bharat's been chastised by King Rugana and for not carrying the palanquin properly, and the king makes some sarcastic comments and chastises Jad Bharat. And first of all he says, you must be fatigued or old. Then he says, are you dead or mad? Then he says, I'm your servant and I'll punish you because I'm the king and you're my servant. So the king was actually quite offensive to Jad Bharat, and because he didn't realise, Jad Bharat wasn't just some Shudra that he'd, like one of his servants, but he was actually a very exalted soul. So when the king spoke these words, then Jad Bharat, he didn't react in a horrible way. He simply smiled, and then he started responding to the king's words. And these are the verses he's responding with. And so when the first thing the king said was that you're old and fatigued, then Jad Bharat replied that I'm the spirit soul, I'm detached from the body, and the load that I'm carrying, this palanquin or this body is not, and the fatigue from it isn't actually belonging to me because I'm the soul. So and then in the second sarcastic comment, the king says that you're not very strong and stout, because Jad Bharat actually was very strong and stout. And so the king was saying to him, you're not very strong and stout. So and then Jad Bharat says, all this fatness, thinness, these bodily designations, they don't really apply to the soul. And then the king says, are you dead despite the life within your body? And Jad Bharat says, everything has a beginning and an end. So, this is also applying to his situation here. And so the fourth thing is now, the king says, do you not know that I'm your master and you're my servant? So in this, Jad Bharat is saying that, the servant, the master and servant, this temporary relationship is just conventional. It's like tomorrow, I can become the king and you may become my servant. So these are just temporary positions in this world. And now Judd Burrett's further explaining that, if you think you're the king and then it's your duty to punish me, then, what do you want me to do? So this is the part we're at now. And Srila Prabhupada explaining, showing that this is temporary nature of this material world, that it's like straws in the ocean. They all come together, they clump together for a little time, and then they just separate when the waves come. They just disappear and go in their own directions. And actually this is the case, because this life is such a temporary, it's like a fractional moment of eternal time. And this lifespan, we come together, we may have different relationships with different people, with mothers, fathers, husband, wife, children, and then we disperse, the relationships end. Like I just spoke with my mother 2 nights ago, and she was, because she's mourning the death of my father, and she said they had put the ashes in the river, and she says she was really upset because she said, my father had spent his whole life, working so hard to maintain the family. He went through so many struggles and difficulties, and at the end, it was like this ashes. It was like this is the result of all that work, And she says this is actually so horrible. And I was trying to explain to her mum, it's not actually, that's just the body, but Dad's still alive somewhere else. That's the soul never dies. So we get caught up. We work so hard to maintain children, wife, family, and in the material world, and we don't really know the result of it all. We don't actually take that into consideration. We just it's just that we don't actually see the bigger picture. So this is the realization that my mother had, that the real thing is actually God consciousness, because everything else is so temporary, all these relationships. And but if we come to the understanding that we're actually eternal servants of Krishna, then we can put an end to this, samsara, the cycle of birth, death, repetition of this coming together like straws in the ocean and dispersing. And Srila Prabhupada is saying here that in the purport that it's due to the mode of passion, and because of that mode of passion, our mind wants so many things, desires so many things, different relationships, different things like fame, fortune. So we get a particular type of body so that we can actually enjoy those things that we want. And this is all sanctioned by the Lord. It's not like we've got the independent choice. It's only if the Lord sanctions it that it actually happens. So we may desire it, but the Lord's the one who's actually allowing it to actually be fulfilled. He's the fulfiller of our desires. So, and through the material nature, we get a particular type of body, we get a particular family we live in, we have particular relationships, and we have all these different struggles or enjoyments in this material world due to our desires. And it's like here it's described like it's like a drama, or if you think about a soap opera in the modern times, actors come together on a stage, or they play a particular role, and then after the role's finished, they go and do their own thing, or they go from one drama to the next. And sometimes you find that these actors forget their identity. They've got an identity crisis because they don't know who they are anymore, because they've played that many roles that they don't really know who they are. And that's what we're like. We've played so many roles in the material world. We've been so many different living entities, and we've had so many different relationships, millions of lifetimes, and we've forgotten actually who we actually are. We've forgotten our real role. And so we've played like different roles: servants, masters, mothers, fathers, children, sons, husbands, friends, wives, like so many different roles in this material world. And it's all an illusion. It's like playing a role in a drama, and So if we become so absorbed in these temporary roles, then we forget actually who we are, and when we wake up to the fact that actually we're eternal servants of Krishna, when we start awakening our Krishna consciousness, then it all becomes like, wow, it's like a wake up. We wake up from this slumber, we wake up from this dreamland that we're in, with all these different roles that we've played. And it's only through Krishna consciousness that we can actually realise this. We can't really understand it in any other way. And the reason we get so entangled is because of our mind. The mind is the cause of our material entanglement. It's actually, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita how the mind, it gets contaminated by the mode of passion. Then this love for Krishna turns into lust for this material energy. So, under the modes of material nature, the mind actually acts through the senses, because the mind is actually a subtle thing. It can't actually do anything, it's not like, it can only desire really, and things like this. So, but through the senses, the mind actually acts through the senses, and that's how it enjoys, because you can think of like enjoying, for example, a gulab jamun or a rasgulla, but you can't really enjoy it in the mind. You have to actually eat it to enjoy it. So the senses are actually there. It's like the mind with the senses, with the help of the senses, is actually trying to enjoy this material world. So so we perform activities through the senses, and from that we actually suffer or enjoy in this material world. So this is the law of karma. So we perform good activities. If we perform good activities, we get good reactions. We can enjoy in the material world. If we perform sinful activities, we suffer. We get bad karma. We suffer in the material world. But actually, both of us are binding us to the material world, because if we want to enjoy the material world, we still have to take birth, and we still have to go through birth, death, old age, and disease and death. So we still have to suffer. Actually, both are actually causes of suffering. So, because they both keep us in the material world. So, so the only way we can actually get free from this is by performing Krishna conscious activities, because that's free from any karmic reaction. There's no karma, it's karma free. There's no reactions, good or bad, and it liberates us from this material world instead of keeping us in the material world. So it's the mind's desire that's what causes us to. It takes us away from Krishna consciousness, or it. Or if the mind becomes a good friend, then it actually helps us in our Krishna consciousness. So we can't stop desiring things, because, like Srila Prabhupada says, we're not stones. The desire will always be there, but we have to change the desire from material things to spiritual things. So it's not that we negate desire, but we can desire Krishna conscious activities, Krishna conscious things, to please Krishna. So, you may want to like grow some vegetables or flowers or something, but instead of growing them for your own sense enjoyment, you grow them for Krishna's pleasure. So it's such a simple thing. You use the same activity, but you just transfer it to pleasing Krishna, and it becomes like free from any karmic reaction. So just like we have to cook, so we cook things to please Krishna, and that way whatever we take is free from any karmic reaction. So we can do that with nearly everything. We can, if we like whatever we like to do, as long as it's within Krishna consciousness, we can perform those activities. Like if we want to play music, we can play music and please Krishna by performing kirtan. So any activity that we can use it in some way to please Krishna. Whatever propensity or talent we may have, whatever kind of abilities we may have, we can use them in Krishna's service, and in that way, in some form, we're dovetailing our activities in Krishna consciousness and purifying them. So this human form of life is for purification. It's a very rare opportunity to have this human form of life, and and the best usage of this human form of life is to serve Krishna, to give this one life to Krishna, or as many lives to Krishna. We may come back in many lifetimes, but in all our lifetimes, we're hoping to be devotees of Krishna, so we can use our activities and our body in Krishna's service. So in that way we can purify our existence, and our ultimate, the whole point of all our activities is that Krishna is pleased, and that's the real result of all our Krishna conscious activities. So is there any questions or comments? Yes, Laura.
How can we know that Krishna is pleased?
Krishna is pleased when the devotees and the spiritual master are pleased. That's how we know Krishna is pleased. Because when the spiritual master is pleased, then Krishna is pleased. That's how we know directly. Otherwise, we may not know if Krishna is pleased. But when the devotees are pleased as well, when the sadhus are pleased, when the spiritual master is pleased, then pleased with us, then we know that Krishna is definitely pleased with us. That's how we know for sure. But I don't know any other way. We can perform those activities that are in the Shastras that Krishna is telling us to do, so then we know that's pleasing Krishna. So Guru, Shastra and Sadhu is the best means of knowing if we're pleasing Krishna or not, if we're following those three, and we're pleasing those three.
As long as we're following them in the right mood as well.
Yeah, because it's depending on, I mean, in the beginning we may not be able to follow, so like in the proper mood, we may be doing it, unconsciously, even not even when we're chanting or japa, we may not be even like focused on the holy name, but it's our endeavours, Krishna sees our endeavour, and that's what he's pleased with, even if it's difficult, because he knows that the material energy is very strong, and he knows that it's very difficult for the living entities to actually escape Maya's, enticements and allurements. But if we're making a lot of endeavour to be Krishna conscious, then that's actually very pleasing to Krishna. So we have to make the effort, and then we get Krishna's mercy. Shishikodantai mai pashishiki jana. Is there any other questions or comments?
The king was, the Jagannath was saying to the king that, we're just playing parts, so if you want to be the king, then I can be the servant, if that keeps you happy. I'll just play that part, I'll play that game with you. So it seems like he was so detached, he was so elevated, that he wasn't upset that the king was in that illusion. So I suppose that's a simple adhikara, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I read that because the reason that Jagannath responded to King Rugana, because he could have just stayed silent, he didn't have to speak even to King Rugana, but because he could see that the king was quite learned, then he wanted to help him advance in his Krishna consciousness, and also because there was another reason, about it, was he was just being very merciful, and so what was the question?
So it was just obviously a symptom of obviously he was very elevated, is that he's not upset with having to be, and the king just said, well, actually I'm going to be the king and I'll be the servant. It's like he wasn't, okay, what's the, what are we doing, like a drama, Okay, so these are you're playing the king, okay, and I'm playing the servant, okay, and it was just, wasn't bothering.
Yeah, but I mean, it's because we have a particular body and we are in a particular situation. Then even within Krishna consciousness, we have to play our roles. We can't pretend to be something we're not. If we have a body of a particular woman or a man, then we play that role, and and purify that role and become Krishna conscious, not, artificially try to be something we're not. So that's why there's Varnashram, so that we fill our roles properly. A mother fulfills her role properly, a wife fulfills her role properly within Krishna consciousness, and that's what actually purifies us and helps elevate us to Krishna consciousness, ultimately to a purified state of Krishna consciousness. So we can't artificially try to be detached, when we're not. So we have to still play that role, unless we're exalted like Jad Bharat, who's totally above the bodily platform. He doesn't really fit in Varnashram because he's actually far more elevated, above Varnashram rules and regulations. So he was already in that elevated consciousness, so he didn't have to play a particular role, But we are not on that level, so we have to play particular roles, and within Krishna consciousness. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Well, sometimes we're struggling with that. We think we are the king. And we got the wrong path in the drama. You're supposed to be the king, and we keep looking at things. But I thought they were supposed to be my man's. A man's supposed to be controlling everybody, being in prayer. And then we're having to relearn our script. And no, you were said that you have to go and do things and do what and humble.
Yeah. Ultimately, we're all servants of the servant. It doesn't matter who we are in Krishna consciousness, whether we're, a temple president or the GBC, or we're just like, a cook or whatever. We're all servants of the servant because that's their eternal nature and that's our service. It's actually the servant of the servant. So whatever role we're playing in, Krishna consciousness, that's actually our eternal nature, to be the servant of the servant. And that's what Lord Chaitanya says, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord of the milkmaids of the bridge.
So after this incident, he's kind of blown his cover, isn't he, really? Yeah, about it now, everyone's realising. Did he just go back to, maybe it doesn't say, but it seemed at least with the king he would be able to.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, what happens to Jagannath.
And also, he's come down onto the Majjhima platform to preach to the king. He could have stayed on the Uttama platform, which is where he just sees everybody as really they're just all doing what Krishna wants them to do, and under the control of the most of material nature. So these many times he's saying they need to preach. He thinks everybody else is engaged and he's not. So he came down because he must have seen the potential for the king and realised, okay, because you don't get the position of being a king unless you have earned it from some secreting, some pious grade, isn't it?
Yeah, and Srila Prabhupada, I remember him saying that actually the preaching is so enchanting that the Uttama Adhikari will come down to the Majjhima platform to preach because it's so wonderful. It's actually so pleasing to the Lord as well. And it's so much merciful. There's so much mercy that we can give through preaching. So it's although we think the Uttama Adhikari is the highest and it is the highest platform, but to preach is actually so great that the Uttama Adhikari voluntarily comes down to the Majjhima platform to preach. So that's how great it is, how preaching is so great.
Yeshiva Raman was saying, but when the Uttama Adhikari comes down to the Majjhima platform, his preaching is more potent, it's more advanced, so he has a more profound effect upon the heart of the conditioned soul because of the purity there.
Yeah. Because although the Majjhima has to discriminate, so the Majjhima sees the Supreme Lord as worshipable, he makes friends with the devotees, associates with the devotees, he is compassionate to the innocent and he avoids the envious. So although he discriminates, somebody who's already been an Uttama, then he sees everything in relationship to Krishna, so he's on a higher platform. He sees he's not just coming up to that platform, he's already beyond that. So he's actually more effective in his preaching. because he has on a very high stage of bhava or prema, then he can actually give so much more to the persons he's compassionate to. He gives his association, which is very exalted. Like when Srila Prabhupada was around, devotees felt this, this ecstasy of just being around him. There's so many devotees that experienced that, and there was like these waves of ecstasy. Devotees, even there was one time at an airport when Prabhupada was arriving, and all the devotees usually went to see Srila Prabhupada, and they would have this kirtan and everything, and there was these two men that were not like devotees, they were just ordinary karmis, they were just standing there, and they were affected by the whole thing as well. They started crying, although they didn't even know anything about Prabhupada, they didn't know anything. So it just shows that Prabhupada had so much potency that just being in his presence evoked that. So Prabhupada actually preached even without even saying anything. He could actually give so much mercy just by his presence.
So is a lesson that we can learn from all this that sometimes we have to be very patient to wait just for the right moment when we can. People, with your mum, she was worried about the body, so you have to wait for the right time to say to somebody they're very emotional about something.
Yeah. Also, if you see how here that the Jad Bharat didn't immediately start like preaching to the king. He kind of replied to him his sarcastic comments, but he didn't directly start preaching to him until the king actually, realized that and offered his respects to Jad Bharat and accepted him in that role. So unless somebody is actually accepting us as a respect for us in that role, then we won't have the same effect, unless they accept us as an authority of some sort. We won't be able to preach, we won't be able to affect them. So it's only when the king realised this that he actually could accept Jad Bharat as an authority and accept his instructions.
It's interesting, in the first time with Lord Chaitanya Prakash and the Saraswati, Lord Chaitanya, he sat down where the shoes were, and Prakash said that he came over and he was very respectful. He offered his hand to raise Lord Chaitanya and bring him over, and Srila Prabhupada makes the point that Lord Chaitanya is intelligent enough to see that if he can engage in some of the other security to begin with, then it will make the ground fertile and then to be able to be preached to. So in terms of some kind of, you can't just go up to somebody and maybe confront them and say that you're wrong and this is right, because they'll need a certain amount of piety to be able to see that, to be able to accept that, isn't it? Otherwise, and so for that reason sometimes you have to just wait and try and give them a shout and let them get the holy name, and eventually comes a point when you can confront them.
Yeah. And there also has to be some respect. You're not going to take direction from somebody you don't respect. So it's like because Lord Chaitanya did that, then Prakashananda Saraswati offered respect to Lord Chaitanya, and they all asked him to have a seat in a proper place, and that was like they realised, and also because he was giving off this effulgence, and they were thinking, oh, this is like Narayan, so they could accept directions from him. So that's definitely one of the qualities. There has to be some respect for that person that we're going to take directions from, and that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says that when Arjuna was speaking with Krishna like friends, but then there was one point where he accepted Krishna as a spiritual master, and he says now the talks between friends stopped, and it was a spiritual master and disciple relationship, and that's when it was a different relationship from that point on. And so he says, when there's friends we can argue, but when there's spiritual master and disciple, there's no argument. That's when argument stops, sort of thing. So that's why, right now, Maharaj Rahugana is having these arguments with Jad Bharat and these sarcastic comments, but then when he does accept Jad Bharat as a spiritual master, then he just accepts and he follows he listens to his instructions and accepts his directions. And then there's no sarcastic comments after that. So it's a really nice. This chapter is really nice in showing, the perspective from a realized soul like Jad Bharat. It's not just like he's theoretical knowledge. He's actually he's an experienced. He's an elevated, exalted soul who's actually living the philosophy of not being the body, being the soul. And that's how, and when we can actually understand from his perspective, when we see from that perspective, then everything else becomes all these different relationships, and we see the reality of it. It's not that we should become artificially detached and think, okay, I don't want any relationships with anybody. We have to live in the material world, and we have to have relationships, especially with devotees, to help us in our Krishna consciousness. So we have to find how to associate with devotees, how to have loving exchanges with devotees, because that's actually pleasing to Krishna. So these other relationships in the material world are temporary and illusory, but the relationship with devotees help us in our journey to Krishna.
Yeah, also it's interesting that Lord Chaitanya, he saved the preaching for the heads, for the big people, like Sarvam Bhattacharya, once he converted him, that meant there were half a million people going along with it as well. He also Sarvam Bhattacharya was in the Pharisee faction, and thousands of souls you feed them and instead that takes care of the masses. So you see here with Jad Bharat, he's not going around telling the guy in the street about it. He goes with the king, and the king shows him respect. That means everyone, the whole entourage, all the citizens, they love that, all the kings, and down to Jad Bharat.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you see throughout the Bhagavatam and even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that he gave this knowledge to the sun god, who instructed to Manu, who instructed Ikshvaku. So they were all Kshatriya kings. He didn't actually give this knowledge to the Brahmanas. He gave it to the Kshatriyas, because the Kshatriyas are the ones who are going to disseminate the knowledge to everybody, to all the citizens. So, and we see here, Jad Bharat thought it good to speak to Maharaj Rahugana, because Maharaj Rahugana is a king, and he could give this knowledge to all the citizens and get them to follow it. And that was the duty of the kings in days gone by, that actually they were the representatives of the Lord, and they would actually help the citizens become God conscious. So they needed this knowledge more than anybody else, so that they could actually help the citizens also become God conscious. And also, if we look at the different associates of Lord Chaitanya, they also initiated kings, like Srinivasacharya initiated a king, Bibhuran, I can't remember his name, the king that Srinivasacharya initiated. So they also met great kings and governors, and they converted them. They got initiated, and so they could actually, whoever the king was governing, they could also become Krishna conscious. So it was like a really good way of spreading Krishna consciousness. And it's like that's how actually Buddhism actually went so far and wide, is because King Ashok took up Buddhism and he spread it all over India. So that's how it actually became so popular. So it's if we have somebody, a leader or a government post or a king that would take up Krishna consciousness and spread it, it would become more spread worldwide than any other way, And because we can go and Sankirtan, you know, in the street and give a few books here and there, but you know, somebody who's like a leader in the government, they can actually do a lot more propaganda in Krishna consciousness and spread it. Is there anything else?
I was just it's just that we can see we have devotees in ISKCON like Jagannath Maharaj, Generally, Jagannath, and James Shetty. There's a few others as well, and they're getting through to sympathetic people in society, you know, and the people are really impressed by them. So that has a massive effect on what happens in general.
Yeah.
Even there was an advertisement and showed a car, and the car had been dismantled into just like the framework and then rebuilt up into a different car, and it was saying same soul, different body. So this idea of transmigration, changing the body of the soul, is permeating through now into society.
Yeah, and also like I was thinking, in the modern day, generally like the leaders, like the government people, are not very well kind of looked upon. But what are popular are like great film stars or pop singers or something. So they're, you know, the devotees, they went to the Beatles, you know, to George Harrison and helped him to take up Krishna consciousness, and he spread it. And so many devotees came from that because everyone loved George Harrison and his songs, you know. So he did so much preaching that way. So the devotees used that tactic that they could actually get to the top people that people are that people really like, and if they take up Krishna consciousness, then anyone who's associated with those will take it up, and that's what they did, and that's what George Harrison did. So we can see from that, so many devotees came from that preaching. So in some ways the devotees have to use some other ways, other methods by which they can actually get to the people through some people that are like really popular or famous, and that way they can spread Krishna consciousness very quickly. Is that okay?
Yeah, this straw-like relationship that we have, does that take on a new meaning when we become self-realised to some degree? So, say in a family situation, you get some books, read them, talk about them within the family. Does that take on a new meaning then?
Yeah, well, if we become devotees, then they'll benefit from that. So whatever benefit we're making, they'll also reap the benefit from our devotional activities. So in one sense, if we see it in that way, that they're also souls, and temporarily we have this relationship as mother or son or daughter or father, whatever it is, but because we're becoming devotees of Krishna, then they'll also get the benefit, and that will help that soul go forward to Krishna as well. So in that way, we can see it as a very positive thing.
Yeah.
You see, and it shouldn't be. It's not like we should think, okay, now I'm totally detached from family. Well, even if there is some attachment, we can use that attachment in Krishna's service. You know, we can help that soul move up along to Krishna. So,
Yeah, I have a second question, that's okay. At the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, if we agree to be controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His eternal servants, His temporary condition ceases to exist. So I was wondering if you could elaborate what Srila Prabhupada means by being controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
well, we follow his instructions. It's like we voluntarily want to be controlled by Krishna's instructions. You know, we want to be guided by his words and by his devotees, what they want us to do, his eternal servants like Srila Prabhupada, the spiritual masters, the sadhus, who can guide us. So if we want to go to Krishna, then we have to be under their control. Like, we don't want to be separatists and have our own separate ideas of what we want to do. We just want to be fully controlled by Krishna. We voluntarily want ourselves to be in that condition. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we better stop there. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai,
Jai.
Iskon Guruvinda ki jai,
Jai.
Shabbat ki jai,
Jai.
Gaur Govinda.
Very well. Jagannath Priya,
Iskon Guruvinda ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki